Hey guys, it's Lewis of the Gaming Rift here, and today I'm doing another tier list. There's really nothing to talk about here, you all know what tier lists are. Also, just to let you know guys, I will be remaking my existing tier lists with the new editing software. But with that being said though guys, let's get into the tier list on my opinions of the Spider-Man. We have 5 tiers here. We have God tier, great movie, okay not bad, mediocre, and kinda trash. Basically the ones that are going in the top tier are my personal favourites. The one that go near the bottom really aren't that good, but they still have some merits to them. As none of these films are bad, but I just prefer some of them to others. Also, I will try and not include nostalgia, and I will also keep my biases as much as I can out of the video, although they will influence my opinion somewhat, I'm sure. I can guarantee that you guys will not agree with this list, and that's absolutely fine. Feel free to let me know your rankings down below. Spider-Man 2002, the film that started it all, as well as my first ever superhero film. This film for me is a near perfect, as this film introduced me to the superhero genre, and it was also one of my first ever films that I watched growing up as a kid. The film, in my opinion, is close to perfect, as it focuses on everything that matters in a film and nails them to a T. The characters are simple, yet they work really, really well. The character of Peter Parker, as well as the portrayal by Tobey Maguire, is so heartfelt and genuine that you really just want to cheer for the guy. The action hasn't aged all that well, although what has aged well is just the characters and the themes within the film. The villain of Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin was fantastic, truly one of the most spectacular performances for a villain I've seen in a very long time, and this performance would also return in Spider-Man NoWayHome when we eventually get to that video. I don't have many fundamental complaints about this film. I guess if I had to jab, if I had to jab at an element of the film, it would be that action hasn't really aged all that well. But as you will see later on with the list, I much prefer films with a good theme and good characters and good story, as opposed to films with good action sequences. Spider-Man 2, it should come as no surprise to anyone, this is also making it into the near perfect tier, and I would put it above the original Spider-Man, as this, in my opinion, is how you do a sequel. Basically, you take everything that worked about the original film, take out everything that didn't work, and just flesh it out and improve it. And that is exactly what Spider-Man 2 does. It's none of this, supernatural plot or, turning the city into lizards. No, super important AI where, Spider-Man has control of, these thousands of killer robots. None of that shit. It's literally just a college student with a good heart trying to do his best in the world, whilst also dealing with the responsibilities of being a superhero. To be honest, the plot is very straightforward and simple, but where there is simplicity, there is complexity. As you can see, every element of Peter Parker's life slowly but surely fall apart due to his responsibilities as Spider-Man. The villain of, Alfred Molina's Doc Ock was nowhere near as sinister as Green Goblin's villain, and I suppose to some people that would be a bit of a weakness or drawback for the film. For me, however, I do like more sympathetic villains, as the dude is the most charming, heartfelt guy, with a family and stuff, and a clear love for, his wife, as well as, the role model he showed for Peter Parker. And you just hate seeing the guy do sinister things like smoking and, just killing people mercilessly. So the action sequences in this film are really, really good as well. Unlike the first film, they have aged very well. The train sequence especially is a personal favourite of mine, but we can also give a lot of love to the, bank fight scene, especially the fight scene that takes place directly after, where it's literally on the side of a building. I think that was, for 2004, this was incredibly impressive stuff, and I have not many complaints about the film itself. I think it's fundamentally perfect as a Spider-Man film. Next choice might be a storm in a teacup, but I think Spider-Man 3 deserves the great tier. Don't get me wrong guys, it's not as good as the first 2 films, and it is by far the weakest entry into the trilogy, but I think that this film gets too much hate. If you take every individual aspect about this film and judge them individually, I think that they genuinely work really well. Sandman, changes, it doesn't change the origin of Spider-Man much, but it fleshes it out and reveals new things to us, such as, who actually pulled the trigger and killed Uncle Ben, and that revelation does affect Peter throughout the film. I think Sandman is very sympathetic, and also the CGI around him, especially, in the first scene after where, it's the day after the experiment and he reforms himself. That CGI is tremendous even to this day, 15 years later nearly. I think Sandman works really well. The character of Venom and Eddie Brock I know gets a lot of hate. I think that they work really well as kind of like dark mirrors to Peter Parker, where, you know, obviously Eddie is what Peter could have become if he didn't have Uncle Ben and Aunt May, and you have, you know, obviously Venom, what Spider-Man could become, and what Spider-Man did indeed become when he had, you know, the symbiote suit. He became a bit of a, you know, full of himself asshole throughout the film, who just, you know, beat the crap out of anyone who he felt deserved it, you know. So you have dark mirrors to these characters. You obviously have Harry Osborn's new Goblin, who was built up since pretty much the end of the first Spider-Man film. I think he worked fine. And to be 100% honest, I think that all of these elements with the film, especially the plot, and, you know, we see a more confident Peter Parker slowly but surely fall apart his life, not necessarily because of external factors like in Spider-Man 2, but this time as a result of himself and how he's literally pushing people away and, you know, all that good stuff. I think that the action works really well as in addition, you know, the final battle, as well as the crane scene where he saves Gwen Stacy. All of these things in a vacuum, I think, are literally on par with the first two films. The problem is they just don't go together all that well, and it does hurt the pacing of the film significantly. Now, again, you take all these scenes individually, judge them individually, they are great and possibly near perfect, but it does hurt the pacing of the film, and I think that's what drags it down a tier for me. The Amazing Spider-Man 1 for me goes into the great tier. I don't think that in terms of being an origin story, it even comes close to the original Spider-Man. I just think this film was a massive step down, mainly because it introduced so many side plots, like the mystery behind Peter's parents, and I think that that really did take away from the film slightly, as, you know, those subplots didn't really go anywhere, at least until the second film, where, in my opinion, they were still handled poorly. Now, what's interesting about this film is the extremely large amount of cut content, as, in my opinion, this has probably the most important cut content from any film in the Spider-Man series, as there are like 20 minutes of deleted scenes on YouTube. I'll put a link to these videos in the description, where if they included all of these deleted scenes, yes, the film would be way longer. However, it would easily put it above Spider-Man 3 and possibly even into the near perfect tier, as the deleted scenes really flesh out the relationship between Dr. Connors and Peter Parker, and you essentially get the sort of relationship that Peter had with Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2, as he really does become a father figure to Peter, and you can see, you know, how inspirational of a guy he is, and how, you know, he slowly descends into madness throughout the film, even with interactions with his own family. And you even get a scene that's deleted where, you know, you have Spider-Man unmasked talking to, you know, Dr. Connors mid-transformation, and, you know, you can see how far Peter's come as a hero, whilst also seeing how far, you know, Doc Connors has regressed into a villain. I think that those scenes would have easily made the film way better. You take those scenes out, however, and they are deleted scenes, so I'm not going to include them in the ranking. I think that, you know, the film is slightly bland by comparison to the original film. Don't get me wrong, I think that the, you know, cinematography as well as the music is almost as good as the other films. You know, it stands up very well. The more grounded nature is very good, especially when you realize, you know, the behind the scenes work that they actually did film Spider-Man swinging, you know, the stunt double swinging on, you know, cables and stuff. They also built literally entire city blocks worth of sets, which was incredible. There was clearly a lot of love and work that went into this film. I just think that, you know, the pacing wasn't very good, and the extremely large amount of cut content really did take away from the film. The Lizard, I think, was fine. He wasn't like that good of a villain, especially with all the cut content. Again, I'm gonna keep bringing up this cut content because it just took away so much from the film. Not having, you know, these scenes that help flesh out the villain and stuff. It really did take away from the film. However, The Amazing Spider-Man is still a personal favourite of mine, and I would watch it any day of the week. It's just a shame that so much of its flesh was taken away, you know, post-production. At this point, pretty much everything has been my own personal opinion. However, something that my opinion does correlate with the public opinion is that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a poor film. And it's such a shame as well, because pretty much every cast member is clearly bringing their all, and you have some really talented actors here, you know, like Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, and, you know, Jamie Foxx's Electro, and obviously Emma Stone and all the rest of the cast really do put in a lot of work. The film is also very gorgeous, I must admit. This is probably one of the most beautiful Spider-Man films, and the Spider-Man suit is also probably the best or second best suit that we actually have seen. I just think it's spectacular. Unfortunately for me though, that's where the positives end. The parents subplot, I think, took up so much of the film, and it just wasn't that good. You know, it wasn't executed well in the slightest. In fact, the first 10 minutes of the film is literally just, you know, a flashback scene, if you like, you know, on the final moments of, you know, Peter's mother's life, you know, in the plane. And you could be forgiven for thinking you'd walked into the wrong film, you know, if you watched it in cinema, which is not a good thing. And whilst the film does get better, how I'd compare The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is, you know how I said that Spider-Man 3 had so many different elements that didn't really work, however each individual element was very good? I'd say that that's pretty much the same for The Amazing Spider-Man 2 if all the individual elements were crap. Like, there's so much of the film where Peter is essentially, you know, upset over the fact that Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy is moving to England for basically like her university stuff. And that subplot goes on way too long, where you literally see Spider-Man stalking Gwen, and it just feels so out of place. You also have the multiple villains, you know, plot where you have like Rhino, who's introduced at the start of the game, where he's essentially just this maniac just driving a truck through a city, to later on in the end of the film where he has like 1 minute of screen time in, you know, the Rhino mech, which doesn't even look that good to begin with. You also have you know, I've forgotten the actor's name, but the actor who plays Harry Osborn's Green Goblin in this film, he just isn't good in the slightest. He has good motives, I guess, for saving his own life, as it's kind of like a disease that he has no control over. However, it just doesn't work in my opinion, especially when he's Green Goblin. I think that he would have been a way better, you know, Hobgoblin, or maybe even a really good Carnage. But as Green Goblin, he just doesn't work, especially when we have such a good iconic Green Goblin in the original film. This guy just feels like a lackluster imitation by comparison. Not to mention, you have, you know, Peter giving up being Spider-Man for like the last 10 minutes of the film. However, you know, at the end of the film, he's right back to being Spider-Man. Now, I know that, you know, chronologically, months go by between him being Spider-Man and, you know, and putting back on the mask and him giving up the mask. And there's actually a really good deleted scene that takes place between, you know, Gwen Stacy's death and the very end of the film, where Peter essentially meets with his father again, and his father gives him, you know, the great power comes great responsibility line. I think that if this film was actually in the film, it would have been way better, even if it would have taken away from, you know, the Uncle Ben scene in the original film. But to be honest, there wasn't too much that could have saved this film. It just had way too much stuff going on, and whilst I did enjoy Electro, I think that his best performance was yet to come in Spider-Man No Way Home. In this film, he just seemed very, very angry, very confused, and whilst he was very powerful, he wasn't all that interesting, at least for me. The first Spider-Man film that takes place in the MCU for me, Spider-Man Homecoming, and for me, this film is just an average. I don't really appreciate like how much praise this film got, and as well as it was the first Spider-Man film we received in the MCU, and you gotta keep in mind the MCU was 9 years at this point, a Spider-Man film was long overdue. I think that this film just had too much potential, and just too much wasted potential, I should say. If someone was to look at Spider-Man 2 and say, okay, how would I make a lackluster version of Spider-Man 2? I would point at Spider-Man Homecoming, as there is essentially no stakes within the film at all. Compared to Spider-Man 2, where there is an abundance of stakes, in Spider-Man Homecoming, this dude's life is pretty much perfect, and even when, you know, events take place, such as the destruction of the sandwich store, and you think like, oh, there should be repercussions or, you know, consequences, there really isn't. He just grins and moves on with his life. The only real consequence that this version of Spider-Man receives, at the very least until, you know, Infinity War, Far From Home stuff, is the fact that he actually loses the suit in the second half of the film. And that is sort of where I think this film becomes average, in my opinion, as if this plot wasn't, you know, introduced, I think it would be a poor Spider-Man film. But the fact that he loses the suit and he kind of puts the Spider-Manning away for a little bit, sort of develops like his personal life, his school life, and then, you know, he actually makes an effort to be more like Peter Parker. But then the reveal of, you know, Adrian Toomes as, you know, Vulture, you know, Michael Keaton, he's such a great actor. This villain is one of the saving graces of the film, as whilst yes, I believe that this villain is once again overrated just like the film, I think he is one of the saving graces of Spider-Man Homecoming, and the fact that, you know, Peter's worked on his personal life and he has to basically hit the undo button and just throw back on the crappy homemade Spider-Man costume to save the day, I think is really, really good and very, very Spider-Man-esque. However, I don't think it saves the rest of the film, and I just think it's an average movie overall. Even though I do watch the film quite a lot, and I did have a lot of fun with it, you know, on release, I think that now it's just an average Spider-Man film, and I've not got much to say about it. Far From Home for me is the first shite Spider-Man film, as it essentially took everything that worked in Endgame and just treated it as a massive joke. I think that this film is just so weak when you realise just like how inconsistent Peter Parker is. On the one hand, you know, he's grieving over the death of Iron Man, yet he's also willing to give literally the only piece of Stark tech he has, you know, he was given from Tony Stark, to this random dude who he only met for like a day or two. I think that, you know, the random inconsistencies with Peter's naivety and his intelligence is stupid, as this is the same dude who knows like multiversal theories, but he's also so dumb as shit. It's like how Mysterio describes him. He's like, oh, you're smart as a whip, but you're just a sucker. Like, it really is the case, and it shouldn't be the case, really. Like, Mysterio, I think, is fine, but he's nothing special as a villain, and he is pretty generic, and his motives aren't even related to Peter Parker, they're related to Iron Man, which I think was a big problem with the Spider-Man villains in the first two films. I do like the more European settings, as well as the different locations, you know, with the tour of Europe. I think that really was pretty unique. However, the elementals were pretty boring. The reintroduction of the Spider-Sense was just handled poorly, in my opinion. There really isn't much about this film that I enjoy. Essentially everything that was good about Endgame, this film just treated as a joke, and it should be remembered as a joke. The SpiderVerse for me is also an average. I think that it's better than Homecoming purely because it actually has like its own original narrative, and the fact that it combines so many original characters together and they actually worked, I think deserves praising. I think that the villain of Kingpin was one of the better villains we've ever seen. However, the biggest problem for me is just the Miles Morales arc. I've just not been that interested in him, to be honest. Even with the PS4 games, you know, like the original game as well as the Miles Morales game, I think the Miles Morales just isn't really my kind of character. He's not as interesting to me as Peter Parker, you know, the iconic original, if you like. I do like, you know, the portrayal of Peter Parker in this film, and I think that if you take it for what it is, I think that it's actually, you know, maybe a great or even a near perfect film, but for me this just didn't really work. Also, the fact that the animation literally makes it's headache inducing at times, and it really does make me want to be sick, which doesn't help, you know, the fact that, you know, you suffer from motion sickness, you're not going to enjoy this film nearly as much as the live action films. But I think that for what it is and for what it did in like its own self-contained universe, if you like, I think the film is pretty good, but just not really my thing. I rank both Venom films together, as in the grand scheme of things they are very similar, and, you know, they're just not that good in my opinion. So first off, the original Venom I'm going to put in poor. I'm going to put it behind The Amazing Spider-Man, and Venom Let There Be Carnage is, in my opinion, the worst Spider-Man related film. So first off, I'll go with Venom. This film for me was actually pretty entertaining. You know, the character of Eddie Brock, you know, portrayed by Tom Hardy, I actually did enjoy, you know, the chemistry between him and Venom, and I think that the characters, while stereotypical to an extent and very lackluster, I think the chemistry between them are fine. Individually, they kind of suck, but I think that the chemistry they had and, you know, the performances were fine. The action was also pretty good whenever it involved Venom. I think that, you know, the SWAT team fight was pretty good, although the final battle between Riot and Carnage was shit, as you literally couldn't tell who was who at times just because of how dark everything was. Other than that, I think it was a pretty just average, lackluster, generic superhero film. If the superhero was like an anti-hero kind of thing. Venom Let There Be Carnage, I feel like it did develop the characters more and it did add like some flesh to it, but in my opinion, the film just wasn't really my thing. Like, I appreciated the final battle between the two symbiotes. I think it was better than the original film, but I just didn't like this film much in the slightest. You know, I liked the final battle, just like the Incredible Hulk. You know, I'm a big sucker for, you know, a big CGI fight between two giant monsters. But, you know, other than that, there was very few memorable moments in these movies for me, and the fact that they didn't even feature Spider-Man at all, at the very least until, you know, these guys were featured in the post-credit scene of, you know, No Way Home, I think that they should be low on the tier list just by default, really. And now, finally, the film you've all been waiting for, Spider-Man No Way Home. So, this film for me, I've changed my opinions on it quite a lot, and I actually do intend on making a review of this film at some point. So I'm pretty sure, you know, first reveal and, you know, the trailer and stuff, it was near perfect. We all lost our collective minds over the returning characters. It was near perfect at the time. When the film came out, it was also in the near perfect. You know, the hype was just insane. The fan service really did make this film shine. However, it's been nearly a year now since the hype has dropped, and for me, I think that this film is the top of great. I don't think it hits the near perfect tier, and before you guys head to the comment section and with your collective pitchforks, hear me out. So, yes, the fan service in this film is near perfect, as all the returning characters are either just as good as they were in their debut films, or in my opinion improved. Like you have Tobey and Andrew, the more experienced Spider-Men. They really do bring a lot to the table. Same with the returning villains, especially Doc Ock and, you know, Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin. The dude is terrifying, and even though he's not been in the role for nearly 20 years, he fits right back in as if he's been playing the character like continuously back to back for years. All of the characters, especially Electro, are really, really good, and as I mentioned with The Amazing Spider-Man, I think that Electro really did come into his own in this film. He really became, he went from like a lackluster villain to instantly one of the best, and in my opinion, a top 3 or top 4 Spider-Man villains. The soundtrack as well is fantastic in this film, especially, you know, the returning music from, like, you know, the Raimi films as well as the Mark Webb films, as well as, you know, the Spider-Man music from, you know, Homecoming and stuff like that, all remixed together. It was fantastic. The Spider-Man suits as well in this film, it introduced, in my opinion, one of the best Spider-Man suits, that being the one that we saw in the ending of the film, you know, the homemade sort of cloth suit. I think it looked really, really good, and in my opinion, there's just a lot of good things in this film. Unfortunately, the main reason it's not in near perfect is just the writing of the film itself. The plot is all over the place, and the writers and developers actually revealed that they constantly change things about the script, like constantly. So the story was, in my opinion, a mess, and it was even a mess, you know, in production. And you got to keep in mind as well, Spider-Man had such bullshit plot armor in this film that it made it really difficult to relate to him at times. Don't get me wrong, Tom Holland is, in my opinion, the best in this film out of any of the 3 films. I think that his, you know, he has by far the most stakes to deal with in this film, and I'm sure you don't need me to point that out to you. However, the fact that he literally wins a fight with he wins a fight against Doctor Strange when, you know, we all know that Doctor Strange would kick all 3 of the Spider-Man's ass, you know, at once. The plot armor that he has in this film and some of the writing really doesn't work for me, and that's why it's not in near perfect. Now, yes, the fan service in this film is phenomenal, and I think that it's easily the best out of the MCU Spider-Man films, but with that being said, I can't put it on near perfect just because the writing was pretty bad at times, but everything else in the film, in my opinion, is near perfect. It just doesn't quite hit the near perfect tier just because the story lets it down a little bit for me. But anyways, guys, those are my own personal opinions and my tier list on the Spider-Man films. If you agree or disagree, feel free to let me know in the comment section down below. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. We recently, you know, hit a sudden growth spike recently, which was very, very hype. And I hope that we can continue growing all the way to our yearly goal of 1K subscribers. Have a nice day, everyone. Feel free to comment new tier list ideas if you like the video, if you like the topic, or you like the idea of more tier lists in the future. I'll make some more. Just feel free to comment your own suggestions. Have a nice day, everyone, and I'll see you on the next one. This is Lewis, the Gaming Rift, signing out, and have a nice day.